year is 1941. Across the vast expanse of the Pacific, two great powers are on a collision course. But this is not just a clash of nations, it is a collision of two fundamentally different philosophies of war, forged in steel and wood. In the barracks of the Imperial Japanese Army, the philosophy is ancient, rooted in the code of Bushido. Here, the soldier is taught that his weapon is not merely a tool, but a sacred vessel of the emperor's will. He carries the Arisaka Type 38, or the newer Type 99. It is a long, elegant rifle, often taller than the man carrying it. On the receiver is stamped the 16-petal chrysanthemum, the seal of the emperor himself. To surrender this rifle is a disgrace. To lose it is a sin. The Japanese doctrine was built on the concept of one shot, one kill. Japan was an island nation with limited natural resources. Metal, powder, and brass were precious. Commanders drilled into their men that ammunition must never be wasted. The Arisaka was designed for this reality. It was a bolt-action rifle, a technology that had dominated the world for 50 years. To fire, a soldier had to lift the bolt handle, pull it back to eject the spent casing, strip a new round, and lock it down. Click, clack, bang. It was a rhythm that demanded precision. It required the soldier to break his sight picture with every shot. But the Japanese high command didn't see this as a flaw. They saw it as a discipline. They believed that the spirit of the soldier, his Seishin, was more powerful than any machine. They believed that accurate spiritual fire and the terrifying shock of a bayonet charge would shatter any enemy. They looked at the Americans and saw a soft, spoiled people, too reliant on luxury and technology to fight with the heart of a samurai. Meanwhile, in Springfield, Massachusetts, a genius named M1 Garand was finalizing a weapon that would turn that samurai philosophy into a suicide note. The U.S. Army had made a gamble that no other army in the world was willing to take. While the Germans, Russians, and British entered the war still carrying bolt-action rifles similar to the Arisaka, the Americans decided to issue a semi-automatic rifle to every single infantryman. The M1 Garand was an engineering marvel. It tapped the expanding gas of the fired bullet to drive a piston, eject the empty shell, and load a new one faster than the human eye could follow. There was no bolt to work, no hand movement, no loss of sight picture. The American soldier could pull the trigger 8 times in 4 seconds. Traditionalists in the U.S. military had fought against it. They argued it was too heavy, too complex, and that soldiers would waste ammunition if they didn't have to work for every shot. But the modernists won. They understood a new truth. In the chaos of modern war, the side that puts the most lead in the air usually wins. This was the doctrine of fire superiority. The contrast was stark. The Arisaka was a spear that could shoot, a weapon designed to support the bayonet charge, maximizing the soldier's physical courage. The M1 Garand was a machine, a weapon designed to overwhelm the enemy with industrial output, 8 rounds at a time. As the war clouds gathered, the Japanese soldier polished the chrysanthemum on his rifle, confident in his spiritual superiority. He practiced his bayonet lunges, believing that no enemy could withstand his will. He did not know that he was about to face an enemy who could fire, reload, and fire again before he could even cycle his bolt. In 1941, the world was about to witness what happens when a 19th century philosophy meets 20th century engineering. The Arisaka was a masterpiece of the old world. The Garand was the herald of the new. And in the jungles of the Pacific, the debate between one shot, one kill and volume of fire would not be settled by arguments, but by the cold, hard reality of survival. The bolt was slow, the gas was fast, and speed was about to become the deadliest weapon of all.
August 7, 1942. The world changed, but the Japanese Empire didn't know it yet. The location was Guadalcanal, a rotting, disease-ridden island in the Solomons that the Marines quickly christened the Green Hell. It was here, on a narrow spit of sand at the mouth of the Ilu River, that the romanticism of the samurai would crash headlong into the industrial brutality of the American assembly line. Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki was a man of supreme confidence. He commanded the Ichiki Detachment, an elite unit of battle-hardened veterans. They had fought in China. They had tasted victory after victory. To Ichiki, the Americans were soft. They were traitors, not warriors. He believed that one decisive, terrifying night attack, a traditional bayonet charge fueled by spiritual strength, would send the Marines running back to their boats. He didn't even wait for the rest of his forces to arrive. He took 900 men and marched through the dark jungle to wipe out the American perimeter. It was the night of August 21st. The air was thick with humidity and the smell of mud. On the east bank of the river, the Marines of the 1st Regiment lay in their foxholes, waiting. They were tired, they were hungry, and they were terrified, but they were holding M1 Garands. At 3 a.m., the silence broke. A green flare hissed into the sky. Screams erupted from the jungle. "Banzai! Banzai!" as hundreds of Japanese soldiers burst from the tree line. They sprinted across the sandbar, bayonets fixed, expecting the usual rhythm of war. The enemy would fire a volley, pause to work the bolts of their rifles, and in that pause, the Japanese would close the distance and slash them to ribbons. That pause never came. Instead, the sandbar erupted in a continuous, deafening roar. This was the shock of semi-automatic fire. From the Japanese perspective, it was a nightmare that defied physics. They charged into a wall of lead. A Marine with a Springfield bolt-action rifle could fire perhaps 10 to 12 aimed rounds a minute. A Marine with a Garand could fire 40 or 50. Multiplied across the front line, the volume of fire was 3 to 4 times greater than anything the Japanese had ever encountered in China. The first wave of Ichiki's men didn't just fall, they evaporated. The bullets tore through the front ranks, and before the second rank could even step over the bodies, the Marines had already reloaded. The distinctive ping of the en-bloc clips ejecting could be heard over the gunfire, a sound that meant a fresh 8 rounds were being loaded in seconds. Japanese veterans, trained to count shots and time their movements between bolt cycles, found themselves paralyzed. There was no between. There was no gap in the wall of fire. The Arisaka rifle, for all its accuracy and reliability, was useless in this storm. A Japanese soldier would stop, lift his bolt, fire one shot, and before he could cycle the action again, he was hit by 3 or 4 American bullets. Ichiki sent wave after wave. It was a slaughter. The green hell was lit up by muzzle flashes, revealing piles of bodies stacking up on the sandbar like drift logs. The Marines didn't panic. They didn't run. They simply kept pulling the triggers, letting the gas-operated pistons do the work that human muscle used to do. By dawn, the Battle of the Tanaru, as it was misnamed, was over. Colonel Ichiki, realizing the magnitude of his failure and the shame of his defeat, burned his regimental colors and committed ritual suicide. Of his 900 elite soldiers, nearly 800 were dead. The Marines had lost fewer than 40 men. The aftermath on the sandbar was a gruesome tableau that shocked even the hardened Marines, but the strategic shock was far greater. Guadalcanal sent a chilling message back to Tokyo. The Americans were not soft, and more importantly, the era of the bayonet charge was dead. The spirit of the warrior had been broken by an 8-round clip and a gas piston. The Japanese soldier was no longer fighting just a man. He was fighting a machine that never blinked, never tired, and never stopped firing.
In the dense, rotting heat of the New Guinea jungle, visibility was often measured in feet, not yards. Here, the war was not a contest of long-range marksmanship. It was a knife fight in a phone booth. And in this claustrophobic green hell, the engineering differences between 2 pieces of steel and wood became the difference between living and dying. To understand the disparity, one must look at the hands of the soldiers. Take Private Sato of the Imperial Army. He carried the Type 99 Arisaka. As a piece of engineering, it was arguably stronger than any other bolt-action rifle in the world. It had a chrome-lined bore that resisted the jungle rot, a massive extractor that could rip a casing out of a mud-clogged chamber, and a sliding dust cover to keep the mechanism clean. It was a weapon of precision and reliability. But it was fed by 5-round stripper clips. When Sato fired, the recoil kicked the muzzle up. To fire again, he had to break his grip, lift the bolt handle, pull it back, push it forward, and lock it down. In that 1-second motion, he lost his sight picture. He lost the target. In the chaotic, fleeting shadows of the jungle, that 1 second was an eternity. Now, look at Private Miller of the U.S. Army. He carried the M1 Garand. It was heavier than the Arisaka. It was complex, with a gas cylinder and an operating rod that critics back in Washington said would jam in the mud. They were wrong. The genius of the Garand wasn't just that it was semi-automatic, it was how it was fed, the en-bloc clip. When Miller spotted movement in the ferns, he didn't have to calculate his shots. He shouldered the rifle and pulled the trigger. Bang! The gas took over, the bolt flew back, the casing flew out, and a new round was chambered instantly. Miller never took his eye off the sights. He could track a running target through the brush, firing a cadence of death that no bolt-action rifle could match. Bang, bang, bang. But the engineering advantage became most apparent when the guns ran dry. For the Japanese soldier, reloading was a fumble. He had to open the bolt, find a stripper clip in his pouch, align it with the guide slots, shove the 5 rounds down with his thumb, and pull the clip out. If he was panicked, if his hands were shaking or slick with sweat and rain, the rounds could bind, the clip could get stuck. For the American, the empty clip ejected itself with a distinctive metallic ping, clearing the action automatically. Miller grabbed a pre-packaged 8-round clip from his belt and shoved the entire unit, steel and brass together, down into the receiver. Click-clack! He was back in the fight in 2 seconds with 8 fresh rounds. The math was brutal. In a 30-second firefight, a Japanese soldier might fire 10 aimed shots. An American could fire 24. This disparity created a terrifying tactical reality. Japanese squads, pinned down by the sheer volume of American fire, found themselves unable to maneuver. They couldn't lift their heads to aim their superior Arisakas because the air was filled with lead. The spirit of the bayonet could not close the gap against a weapon that didn't need to pause. The M1 Garand didn't just have 3 more bullets than the Arisaka, it had the engineering of a new age. The Arisaka forced the soldier to serve the mechanism. The Garand forced the mechanism to serve the soldier. In the end, the battle wasn't just won by bravery. It was won by the relentless, semi-automatic rhythm of American industry, 8 rounds at a time. The movies tell us that tank warfare is a medieval joust. In films like Fury, 2 steel titans, a Sherman and a Tiger, meet in an open field, lock eyes and trade blows until the stronger armor wins. It is dramatic, terrifying, and cinematic. It is also almost entirely wrong. To understand why the Sherman was armed the way it was, we have to ignore the movies and look at the mission logs. During World War II, U.S. Army operational research found that American tanks engaged enemy tanks in only about 15% of their combat missions. For the other 85% of the war, the Sherman was fighting a different enemy: infantry, bunkers, machine gun nests, and anti-tank guns. For this job, the Sherman's original gun, the short-barreled 75mm M3, was not a weakness, it was a masterpiece. Critics mock the short 75mm for bouncing off the front of a Tiger, but they forget that the Tiger was a rare ghost on the battlefield. The average GI was far more likely to be killed by a hidden German anti-tank gun or a sniper in a church steeple. Against these soft targets, the 75mm was devastating. Its HE shell carried a massive payload of TNT. When it hit a bunker, it didn't just punch a hole, it shattered the structure. Compare this to the British Firefly or the German Panther. Their high-velocity guns were like needles, great for punching through armor, but poor at infantry support. Their shells traveled so fast they would often bury themselves deep in the mud before exploding, absorbing the blast. The Sherman's 75mm shell, traveling slower, would detonate on the surface, wiping out enemy infantry. For the average American soldier pinned down in a hedgerow, the Sherman's weak gun was the hand of God. But what about that terrifying 15%? What happened when the Sherman did meet a German cat? It is true that in a head-to-head duel at long range, the Sherman was outclassed by the Tiger and Panther, but smart commanders didn't fight head-to-head. They used the Sherman's hidden strengths: speed, visibility, and turret rotation. In September 1944, at the Battle of Arisaka, a thick fog descended on the French countryside. It neutralized the German range advantage. The U.S. 4th Armored Division, equipped with 75mm Shermans, clashed with a massive force of brand-new German Panthers. By the numbers, it should have been a massacre of Americans. Instead, the Shermans slaughtered the Panthers. Why? Because the Sherman had a powered turret that could rotate 360 degrees in 15 seconds. The Panther's turret was slow, and its gunner was blind without the commander's help. In the swirling mist, American crews spotted the enemy first, swung their guns instantly, and fired into the Panther's weak side armor. The death trap proved that he who shoots first usually wins. And when the armor got too thick, the Allies upgraded. The British created the Sherman Firefly, jamming a massive 17-pounder anti-tank gun into the turret. It was a clumsy, cramped beast that blinded its crew with muzzle flash, but it could tear the turret off a Tiger from a kilometer away. The Germans learned to fear the Sherman with the long nose so much that they ordered their gunners to target Fireflies first. Meanwhile, the Americans introduced the 76mm gun. It wasn't perfect, but combined with the new high-velocity armor-piercing ammunition, it leveled the playing field. Ace tanker Lafayette Poole, the Texas tanker, scored 12 tank kills, mostly Panthers, in a 76mm Sherman. He didn't win because he had the thickest armor. He won because he was faster, smarter, and saw the enemy before they saw him. The narrative that the Sherman was undergunned is a misunderstanding of what a tank is for. A tank is a tool. You don't bring a sniper rifle to a knife fight, and you don't bring a tank destroyer to an infantry battle. The Sherman was the ultimate multi-tool. It could blast a bunker, machine gun a trench, smoke out a sniper, and, with a bit of skill and a lot of guts, flank and kill a Tiger. It wasn't the duelist of the century. It was the champion of the combined arms battlefield.
By 1945, the empire of the rising sun was setting in a sea of fire. The skies over Tokyo were black, with American B-29 superfortresses raining destruction on the wooden cities below. On the ground, the Imperial Japanese military was not just losing territory, they were losing the technological war. The officers who had once scoffed at American reliance on machines now looked at their own bolt-action Arisakas with a growing sense of dread. They realized far too late that the spirit of the samurai could not stop a semi-automatic rifle. In a desperate bid to stave off the inevitable invasion of the home islands, the Japanese Imperial Navy, always more technologically progressive than the Army, embarked on a secret project at the Yokosuka Naval Arsenal. The order was simple and humiliating: copy the American rifle.
Engineers took captured M1 Garands, scavenged from the bloody battlefields of the Philippines and Okinawa, and dismantled them. They studied the gas system, the rotating bolt, and the trigger group. It was a bitter pill to swallow. For years, Japanese propaganda had claimed Western equipment was weak and inferior. Now their best engineers were frantically trying to clone it. The result was the Type 4, sometimes called the Type 5 semi-automatic rifle. To the untrained eye, it looked almost exactly like an M1 Garand. It had the same wooden stock, the same receiver shape, the same gas cylinder under the barrel. But there were changes born of necessity and Japanese doctrine. Instead of the 36 round, it was chambered for the Japanese 7.7mm cartridge. And in a stroke of genuine ingenuity, the Japanese engineers fixed the Garand's one main complaint, the N-block clip. Instead of the 8-round ejecting clip, the Type 4 held 10 rounds in an internal magazine, fed by 2 standard 5-round stripper clips. It was, on paper, a brilliant evolution. But a weapon is more than just a blueprint. It is a product of industry. And Japanese industry was dying. As the workers at Yokosuka tried to tool up for mass production, their factories were being bombed into rubble. Raw materials were non-existent. The high-quality steel required to make the complex gas pistons and operating rods, parts that had to endure immense pressure, was gone. The few rifles that were hand-assembled were rough, prone to jamming, and plagued by spring failures. The goal was to arm the elite naval paratroopers and the desperate defenders of Tokyo with thousands of these semi-automatic saviors. In reality, only a handful, perhaps 100 to 250, were ever completed. Many were found unfinished on workbenches when the Americans arrived, silent witnesses to a collapsed industrial base. When U.S. Marines landed to occupy Japan in September 1945, they found warehouses full of bolt-action Arisakas, millions of them, waiting for a final battle that never came. But among the piles of old rifles, they occasionally found the Type 4. It was a ghost weapon. It had arrived too late to fire a single shot in anger. The existence of the Type 4 is the ultimate admission of defeat. It proved that the Japanese High Command knew the Arisaka was obsolete. They knew the M1 Garand was the superior weapon. After years of preaching that spirit was more important than firepower, their final act was a frantic attempt to steal the enemy's firepower. The war ended with a profound silence. The M1 Garand had not only defeated the Japanese army in the field, it had defeated their philosophy. The Arisaka, a beautiful, rugged, bolt-action relic of the 19th century, was thrown into piles to be burned or taken home as trophies. The Garand, the greatest battle implement ever devised, stood victorious. Japan's attempt to copy the legend was a tragic footnote, a final futile recognition that in the modern world, the warrior is only as good as the rifle in his hands.